This week, we're going to start a three-part series on how to make Python scripts with command line arguments to help you make useful utilities to do your science. Welcome to another MetPy Monday. Hello, I'm John Lehman, a software engineer at Unidata. On this week's MetPy Monday, we're going to start talking about how to make a Python script. Normally, of course, I do these MetPy Mondays in Python notebooks because that's a great way to do some development and especially to teach. But sometimes you want to actually make a script that you can run, maybe something that you're going to automate with a utility like cron, or maybe you just need to do the same process over and over and don't want to always use the notebook interface. So in week one, we're going to talk about how to make a Python script, just something very basic, and get it running. Then next week, we'll talk about adding some command line arguments, and we'll wrap up in week 3 with a fully functional buoy data plotter utility. The first thing that you'll need to make a script is an editor of some kind. And you can use whatever editor is your favorite, whatever you're familiar with. Maybe it's VI or Emacs from the command line, or maybe even Nano. Or you can use a more graphical tool, Eclipse, PyCharm, Sublime Text. These are all common editors. I'm going to use Atom. So you can go to atom.io and download it for free. This is produced by GitHub and is a cross-platform, a pretty nice editor with a lot of handy features. It's also very customizable if you want to do that, and there are lots of plugins that you can get, but we're just going to use a pretty plain installation of Atom. So go ahead and pause the video and open up whatever editor you like, or install Atom if you don't have any preference. Okay, now that we're in Atom, you can see that we have a pretty bare interface here. You might have some additional tool palettes open by default, but essentially what you see is the main window where we can enter text and save it. So we can make text files, we can make any kind of file we want from here. The key thing is that there's nothing particularly special about a Python script. It's really just a text file that we put .py on the end of to signify that this is a Python file. But it's very similar to how a .c extension on some C source code doesn't do anything special to that. It's still a text file that contains the source code. So we're going to start out and make our little script here. The first thing that's good practice to do is specify what environment you want this script to run in. This mainly affects Linux-based systems. So if you're on Mac OS or Linux Unix machine, this is great. It doesn't harm anything on a Windows machine. And we're just going to use a hash exclamation point and then the path to what you want to use as your interpreter. This is going to be handy when we try to run this as a shell script, not directly through the Python interpreter, as you'll see a little bit later. All right, and then we can start writing Python code. So this is just like in a notebook. The first thing I'm going to do is import the time library. And one thing that you might notice right off the bat is we don't have any syntax highlighting. Well, that's because this is still an untitled, unsaved file, so Atom doesn't know what kind of syntax highlighting it should be using. Is this just a plain text file and you're writing a book? Or is this a C or a Fortran or Python file? It doesn't know. So I'm going to go ahead and save this, and I'm going to give it a .py extension. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and save it as first script.py. As soon as I do that, you see that I start getting some syntax highlighting because now Atom knows this is a Python script. Okay, so for our simple script today, I'm just going to print beginning of my Python script. And then we're going to do a little loop for I in range 10, 0, minus 1. So this is going to count from 10 to 0, non-inclusive on 0, with an increment of -1. launch in curly braces, and then we call .format. So that is going to print launch in, then whatever the value of I is there. I'm going to call time.sleep 1, so that will pause the program's execution for 1 second. And then outside of the loop, I'm going to print blast off. So what you see is we're going to print beginning of the Python script, countdown, launch in 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. And then once we finish that loop, print blast off. So a pretty straightforward program, right? So go ahead and save that. And then we're going to head over to the command line. Okay, so now that we're at the command line, we need to cd into whatever directory your script is in. So I'm going to print working directory, pwd, and we see that I'm in desktop scripting, which is where I saved this, so I'm ready to go. I can even do an ls or dir if you're on Windows, and see that my first script.py is indeed there. So the first thing that we can do is just run this with the Python interpreter. So the command is going to be python, and then first script.py. Remember, you can use tab completion and save yourself some typing there. So now if we press return, this is telling the Python interpreter, here is a file that I want you to go run. So we see the expected behavior here. And now the program's complete and we're back to our prompt. But what if we wanted to run this as an executable? So we don't want to have to say Python for the interpreter every time. Well, one way would be, of course, /firstscript.py. So this is saying I want you to execute current directory firstscript.py. And if we try that, we get a permission denied. So let's take a look and dig in a little bit deeper here. I'm going to use the command ls-l to give me some more information on the contents of this directory. And you can see on this firstscript.py, we have read and write permissions for the user, but no execute. So that's why we're getting a permission denied error. If you want to learn a little bit more about Linux and Unix file permissions or file permissions on whatever your operating system may be, I encourage you to do a quick Google search, and there are lots of great resources out there. So what we need to do is add those permissions to this. I'm going to use the chmod command +x to say I want to add executables on firstscript.py, or I want to add execute permission rather. If I run that command and ls-l again, you can see now that the user has read, write, execute permissions. So now if I try again, /firstscript.py, there we go. We don't have to say that you're using the Python interpreter. That is known from the hashbang at the beginning of the file. And now our script is run to completion. So now if I want to change something in my script, we need to go back to the editor. Let's say maybe this is taking a little bit too long for my debugging purposes, or maybe 10, we just can't stand the anticipation of the launch, so we want to go to 5. Now I'm going to go back to the command line. Okay, we're back to the command line. Let's run it again. So wait a second, now we changed it to 5, but we're still counting down from 10, so what's going on there? This is one of the most common mistakes that we see people make when they're first getting used to doing scripting. You didn't save the file. So we go back to the editor, make sure we save the file, and now go back to the command line. And if we run it again, now we see we're counting down from 5 like we expected. So after this week's MetPy Monday, I encourage you to go open your editor and mess around writing a few basic Python scripts. Maybe even take a look at some of the examples in the MetPy gallery, download them, and work on running them from the command line. This will get you used to that workflow and better prepared to work on next week's assignment, which is going to be to add some command line arguments to our little utility here. And then finally, we'll make something that is meteorologically useful. Thank you for joining me, and I hope to see you on next week's MetPy Monday.